Let's jump into our first idea: antinatalism. Imagine a world where the most profound act of love, the bringing of new life into existence, is reframed as an ethical transgression. This is the core provocation of antinatalism. At its heart, antinatalism is the philosophical stance that holds that procreation is morally wrong. It's not just about not wanting children. It's about the conviction that it is better for no one to be born at all. This isn't a casual preference. It's a deeply argued ethical position that challenges one of humanity's most fundamental biological and cultural imperatives. The arguments for antinatalism are varied, but they often coalesce around a few central pillars. One of the most prominent is the argument from suffering. Proponents of antinatalism contend that to be born is to be exposed to the inevitable realities of suffering. Life, they argue, is inherently intertwined with pain, disappointment, loss, and ultimately death. By bringing a new person into the world, one is essentially condemning them to experience these hardships. They haven't consented to this existence, and therefore, to impose it upon them is seen as an act of harm. Consider the asymmetry argument, famously put forth by philosopher David Benatar. He posits that there is a crucial asymmetry between good and bad things, specifically between the presence of pain and the absence of pain, and the presence of pleasure and the absence of pleasure. Benatar argues that the presence of pain is bad, and the absence of pain is good, even if that good is not experienced by anyone. Conversely, the presence of pleasure is good, but the absence of pleasure is not bad, unless there is someone for whom that pleasure is absent. If a person never exists, they are not deprived of pleasure. They don't miss out on anything. Therefore, there is no harm in not bringing someone into existence. However, if a person does exist, they are then susceptible to pain, and that pain is a harm. From this, Benatar concludes that there is a strong pro-non-existence bias. It is always better not to exist, because existence always carries the risk of pain, and non-existence carries no loss of pleasure. This perspective doesn't deny that life can contain joy and beauty. Antinatalists often acknowledge these aspects, but argue that they do not outweigh the inherent suffering, or that the potential for suffering is so great that it makes procreation an unwarranted gamble on another's behalf. They might ask, is it fair to subject someone to the lottery of life, where the stakes include immense pain, simply for the chance of experiencing some pleasure? Another facet of antinatalism touches upon the concept of consent. A person who does not yet exist cannot consent to being born. Since they cannot consent, and since existence entails potential harm, procreation is seen as an imposition. This idea is particularly jarring because consent is a cornerstone of modern ethics, yet it's impossible to obtain in the context of birth. Furthermore, some antinatalists extend their arguments beyond individual suffering to broader ecological and societal concerns. They might point to overpopulation, resource depletion, climate change, and the myriad injustices perpetrated by humanity as further reasons to cease procreation. From this angle, bringing more people into the world exacerbates existing problems and contributes to a cycle of destruction. It's not just about the individual suffering, but the collective suffering and environmental degradation that humanity perpetuates. The implications of antinatalism are profound and unsettling. If widely adopted, it would lead to the gradual, voluntary extinction of humanity. This outcome is often met with horror or disbelief, yet antinatalists see it as a logical, compassionate, and even heroic conclusion. They are not advocating for violence or forced sterilization, but for a conscious, ethical decision by individuals to refrain from procreation. Critics of antinatalism often argue that it is overly pessimistic, that it undervalues the joys of life, or that it is a form of self-hatred for the human species. They might emphasize the subjective nature of suffering, pointing out that what one person considers unbearable, another might find manageable or even meaningful. Many argue that the meaning and purpose of life are found precisely in overcoming challenges and experiencing both joy and sorrow. To deny new life, they say, is to deny the potential for love, creativity, and progress. Others might simply find the idea counterintuitive to our deepest biological programming and cultural values that celebrate new life. Yet, for those who embrace antinatalism, it is often seen not as a bleak philosophy, but one born of deep compassion. It is an attempt to prevent future suffering, to offer the ultimate freedom from the burdens of existence. It asks us to look squarely at the less romanticized aspects of life and consider whether the gift of life is always a gift, or sometimes an unwitting burden. To fall asleep contemplating antinatalism is to wrestle with the very fabric of existence and non-existence. It's to ponder the weight of being, the escapable shadow of suffering, and the ethical responsibility inherent in creating new life. It can be a profoundly unsettling journey, stripping away the default assumptions about the goodness of birth and the inherent value of more life. You might find yourself drifting into sleep wondering if the silence of non-existence is truly more peaceful than the clamor of being, or if the dream state itself is just another form of suffering we consent to each night. It forces a radical reevaluation of what we consider good, what we consider harm, and whether the greatest kindness might be to simply let the world be without us. The quietude of non-being, the absence of striving, the cessation of all future pain, these are the lullabies of the antinatalist, a controversial melody that challenges our most cherished instincts. Let's jump into our next idea, Efilism.
If antinatalism suggests that bringing new life into existence is morally wrong due to the inevitability of suffering, Efilism takes this idea to its absolute, most extreme, and often shocking conclusion. Efilism is a term coined by the philosopher Magnus Vinding, derived from life spelled backward. It proposes not just that procreation is wrong, but that all sentient life should be eliminated, or, at the very least, prevented from ever existing again, in order to prevent suffering. It's a philosophy that sees existence itself, particularly sentient existence, as inherently negative due to the pervasive and inescapable reality of suffering. Where antinatalism focuses on the ethics of starting new lives, Efilism extends this concern to all existing sentient life. The core tenet is that suffering is the ultimate evil, and its total eradication is the paramount moral imperative. Since suffering is inextricably linked to consciousness and sentience, the capacity to feel and perceive, the most effective, and indeed the only guaranteed way to eliminate suffering completely is to eliminate all sentient beings. This includes humans, animals, and any other entities capable of experiencing pain or distress. This isn't a call for violence or mass murder in the traditional sense, at least not for most Efilists. Rather, it's a philosophical conclusion about the inherent badness of suffering and the logical pathway to its cessation. Many Efilists would advocate for a peaceful, voluntary phasing out of life, perhaps through technologies that could gently and painlessly reduce sentience, or by simply ceasing all procreation and allowing existing life to run its natural course to extinction. The goal isn't to inflict more suffering to end suffering, but to prevent its future occurrence. The foundation of Efilism, much like antinatalism, rests on a profound aversion to suffering. Efilists argue that even if life contains moments of immense joy and pleasure, these do not morally outweigh the existence of suffering. They often adopt a negative utilitarian framework, where the primary moral goal is to minimize suffering rather than maximize happiness. From this perspective, a world devoid of sentient life, and thus devoid of suffering, is morally superior to any world, no matter how filled with pleasure, that also contains suffering.
The absence of suffering is seen as an absolute good, whereas the presence of pleasure is only a relative good, and its absence is not a harm to those who never exist. Efilism often draws on a deep sense of empathy for all beings that suffer. It's a recognition of the immense pain, terror, and misery experienced by countless creatures across the planet, from human diseases and wars to the brutal realities of the animal kingdom. For an Efilist, observing the natural world, the predator and prey dynamic, the constant struggle for survival, the ravages of disease and natural disaster, confirms their view that life is fundamentally a tragedy. They might see the beauty of nature as a thin veneer over an underlying relentless engine of suffering. The implications of Efilism are, understandably, catastrophic from a conventional human perspective. It means the end of all art, all science, all love, all progress, all meaning as we understand it. It implies that the grand narrative of evolution and the development of complex life forms has been, in essence, a terrible mistake. This is why it is arguably one of the most controversial and unsettling philosophies imaginable. It directly contradicts our most deeply ingrained instincts for survival, propagation, and the affirmation of life. Critics often decry Efilism as nihilistic, morbid, and utterly devoid of hope. They argue that it represents an extreme form of pessimism that fails to appreciate the profound value and beauty that can be found in existence, even alongside suffering. Many would contend that the human capacity for love, creativity, and compassion, and the pursuit of knowledge and meaning are inherently good and worth preserving, even if they come at the cost of some suffering. They might also point out the inherent paradox or impracticality of such a philosophy. Who would implement it, and how, without causing immense suffering in the process? The very act of ending all life would itself be a monumental act of suffering. Furthermore, the very idea of a good that is not experienced by anyone, the good of the absence of suffering in a world without sentience, is difficult for many to grasp. Our ethical frameworks are typically anthropocentric, or at least sentient-centric, focusing on the well-being of existing or potential beings. Efilism pushes us to consider a good that transcends all subjective experience. To fall asleep contemplating Efilism is to journey into the deepest, darkest corners of philosophical thought about suffering and existence. It's to grapple with the radical notion that the absence of everything might be preferable to the presence of anything, if that presence entails inevitable pain. You might find your mind wandering through visions of a silent, empty universe, devoid of the cries of joy or anguish, and wonder if that profound stillness truly represents the ultimate peace. The controversy lies in the stark contrast between this vision and our inherent drive to live, to create, to connect. It challenges the very notion of what it means to be good, to be compassionate. It's a philosophy that, by seeking to eliminate all suffering, paradoxically causes immense conceptual discomfort, forcing us to confront our deepest fears about meaninglessness and the potential ultimate futility of all endeavor. The quiet of Efilism isn't just about sleep, it's about the cessation of all dreams, good and bad. Let's jump into our next idea, negative utilitarianism.
Building upon the themes of suffering we explored with Antinatalism and Efilism, we now delve into negative utilitarianism. This is a fascinating and profoundly challenging ethical framework that, at first glance, might seem like a subtle tweak to classical utilitarianism, but its implications are far-reaching and, for many, deeply unsettling. Classical utilitarianism, in its simplest form, asserts that the morally right action is the one that maximizes overall happiness or pleasure and minimizes suffering for the greatest number of people. It's a balancing act. You weigh the good against the bad, and the goal is to achieve the greatest net positive. Negative utilitarianism, however, flips this priority. Instead of focusing on maximizing positive well-being, happiness, pleasure, satisfaction, its primary and often sole ethical imperative is to minimize suffering. It argues that suffering is morally far more significant than happiness.
The presence of suffering is considered an absolute evil, while the presence of happiness is merely a relative good, or even a negligible one in comparison. The reduction or elimination of suffering is paramount, even if it doesn't lead to a corresponding increase in happiness, or even if it means sacrificing some potential happiness. The underlying intuition behind negative utilitarianism is often rooted in the observation that pain and suffering tend to be more potent and impactful than pleasure and happiness. A moment of intense agony can easily eclipse a lifetime of mild contentment. The memory of a traumatic event can haunt someone for years, far outweighing the cumulative effect of many pleasant experiences. From this perspective, avoiding a hellish existence is a far greater moral imperative than achieving a heavenly one. Consider the asymmetry argument again, which we touched upon with antinatalism. In the context of negative utilitarianism, this asymmetry is central. The absence of suffering is always good, even if no one experiences that good. The absence of happiness is not bad, unless someone is deprived of it. Therefore, preventing suffering takes precedence over creating happiness. If you have to choose between a world with immense happiness but also some suffering, and a world with no happiness but also no suffering, a strict negative utilitarian would lean towards the latter. The good of no suffering is an absolute good, while the good of happiness is contingent and, crucially, always accompanied by the risk of suffering. This framework leads to some very counterintuitive and controversial conclusions. For example, if the ultimate goal is to minimize suffering, then one might argue that the most effective way to achieve this is to painlessly eliminate all sentient life. If no one exists, no one can suffer. This is where negative utilitarianism often converges with Efilism and Efilism, providing an ethical justification for such radical positions. It suggests that a universe utterly devoid of consciousness might be the ideal state, morally speaking. Another difficult implication arises when considering population ethics. A classical utilitarian might advocate for bringing more happy people into the world as long as their happiness outweighs any suffering they might experience. A negative utilitarian, however, would be highly skeptical of increasing the population, as each new life represents a new potential locus of suffering. Even if a life is mostly happy, the mere possibility of suffering, especially intense suffering, might be enough to make its creation morally questionable. Critics of negative utilitarianism raise several powerful objections. One common criticism is that it leads to absurd and nihilistic conclusions, such as advocating for the painless extinction of all life. If the only good is the absence of suffering, then the world should be empty. This seems to contradict our deepest intuitions about the value of life, love, creativity, and human flourishing. Another objection is the utility monster problem, but inverted. Instead of a being that derives immense pleasure, imagine a suffering monster that experiences disproportionately intense pain. A negative utilitarian might be forced to dedicate all resources to alleviating this monster's pain, even if it means neglecting the suffering of many others or sacrificing immense happiness. More broadly, it could lead to prioritizing the most extreme forms of suffering, potentially at the expense of addressing widespread but less intense suffering, or neglecting opportunities for vast improvements in well-being. Furthermore, critics argue that negative utilitarianism fails to provide a robust framework for everyday ethical decisions. If the sole focus is on minimizing suffering, how do we weigh different kinds of suffering? Is physical pain worse than emotional anguish? How do we make decisions that involve trade-offs between different forms of suffering, or between suffering and other values we hold dear, like justice or freedom? It can be difficult to construct a positive vision for society based solely on the absence of negatives. Despite these criticisms, negative utilitarianism forces us to confront the profound impact of suffering and to question our default assumptions about the inherent goodness of life and the pursuit of happiness. It asks us to consider whether our focus on maximizing pleasure blinds us to the more fundamental moral imperative of preventing pain. To fall asleep contemplating negative utilitarianism is to enter a deep state of ethical introspection, where the shadows of suffering loom larger than the brightest joys. You might find yourself weighing every potential discomfort against every fleeting pleasure, questioning the very fabric of human striving. The goal isn't to dream happily, but to dream without nightmares, or maybe to dream of a profound and ultimate stillness where no dream, good or bad, can ever disturb. It's a philosophy that, by emphasizing the removal of pain above all else, offers a strange kind of comfort in the idea of complete cessation, a quietude born of absence. It's controversial because it challenges our innate desire for more life, more joy, and instead whispers of the profound peace found in less pain, less struggle, less existence. The controversy isn't just in its conclusions, but in the radical shift in moral intuition it demands. Let's jump into our next idea, voluntary human extinction movement.
Having explored philosophies that question the morality of procreation and the very existence of sentient life due to suffering, it's a natural progression to discuss a real-world movement that embodies some of these ideas. The Voluntary Human Extinction Movement, or VHEMT, pronounced vehement. VHEMT is not a philosophy in itself, but rather a social and ecological movement that advocates for a voluntary, gradual, and non-violent end to the human race. Its motto is, "May we live long and die out." Unlike Antinatilsim or Efilism, which are primarily philosophical arguments, VHEMT is an activist movement with a specific goal: to convince humanity to voluntarily stop procreating, allowing our species to peacefully phase itself out. The core premise is that the extinction of humanity would ultimately be beneficial for Earth's ecosystems and for the suffering of all sentient beings, including humans. VHEMT's motivations are multifaceted, blending environmentalism with a deep-seated concern for suffering and a critique of human impact on the planet. One of the primary drivers is ecological. Proponents argue that humanity is an unsustainable species, consuming resources at an alarming rate, polluting the environment, causing climate change, and driving countless other species to extinction. From this perspective, the greatest service humanity could render to the planet and to the biosphere is to simply step aside and allow nature to heal. They see human activity as inherently destructive to the delicate balance of Earth's ecosystems, and the only lasting solution is to remove the primary cause of that destruction, humanity itself. Another significant motivation aligns with the antinatalist arguments we've already discussed: the prevention of suffering. VHEMT members often share the view that life, especially human life in its current state, inevitably entails a great deal of suffering. They see future generations facing escalating environmental crises, social injustices, wars, poverty, and personal anguish. By choosing not to procreate, individuals can prevent future beings from experiencing these hardships. It's a compassionate act, they argue, to spare potential individuals from the trials and tribulations of existence. VHEMT emphasizes the voluntary aspect. This is not about forced sterilization, genocide, or any form of violence. It's about a conscious, ethical choice made by individuals to refrain from having children. The movement encourages existing people to live their lives fully and happily, but to do so without adding to the population. It's a call for a collective shift in values, away from the biological imperative to reproduce and towards a greater responsibility for the planet and for the well-being of future non-existent generations. The movement also challenges anthropocentrism, the view that humans are the most important entity in the universe. VHEMT suggests that humanity is not inherently superior or more valuable than other species, and that our continued dominance comes at an unacceptable cost to the rest of life on Earth. By voluntarily ending our species, we would be making a profound statement of humility and self-sacrifice for the greater good of the planet.
The ideal scenario for VHEMT would be a gradual decline in human population over several generations, leading to a peaceful and natural end to the human race. They envision a world where the last humans live out their lives in harmony with nature, leaving behind a restored planet for other species to thrive on, unburdened by human interference. Naturally, VHEMT is highly controversial. The idea of humanity voluntarily ceasing to exist flies in the face of millennia of biological programming, cultural values, and religious beliefs that emphasize procreation, family, and the continuation of the species. Critics often argue that VHEMT is overly pessimistic and defeatist. They contend that humanity has the capacity for innovation, problem-solving, and positive change, and that we should focus on finding sustainable solutions rather than giving up entirely. Many believe that human intelligence and creativity are valuable assets that can be used to address environmental and social problems, and that abandoning the planet to nature would be a waste of our unique potential. Others find the idea morally repugnant, viewing it as a form of species-level suicide or a profound rejection of life itself. They might argue that the beauty, love, art, and scientific advancements produced by humanity are inherently valuable and worth preserving, even with all our flaws. The concept of a future without humans is often seen as bleak and undesirable, rather than a utopian ecological vision. There's also the practical criticism. How could such a movement ever gain widespread traction against the powerful biological drive to reproduce and the societal pressures to have children? It seems an almost impossible goal to achieve on a global scale through purely voluntary means. Yet, for those who resonate with VHEMT, it offers a radical but seemingly logical path to peace and ecological restoration. It's a call to reevaluate our place in the world, to question our self-importance, and to consider the ultimate consequences of our actions. To fall asleep contemplating the voluntary human extinction movement is to ponder a future where humanity is no more, not through catastrophe, but through a collective, conscious decision. You might find yourself imagining a world slowly reclaiming itself, buildings crumbling into forests, cities becoming habitats for wildlife, the silence broken only by the sounds of nature, untroubled by human noise. It's a vision that can be both terrifying and strangely calming, the ultimate release from responsibility, the end of all striving, all conflict, all pollution. The controversy lies in whether this vision is one of profound peace or profound loss, whether it represents the ultimate act of compassion or the ultimate surrender to despair. It forces a deep reflection on our legacy, our purpose, and whether our existence is a blessing or a burden to the planet we inhabit. Let's jump into our next idea, the reprehensible conclusion.
From the stark implications of voluntary human extinction, we now pivot to another challenging concept in population ethics, the repugnant conclusion. This is a thought experiment that, for many, reveals a deep flaw or counterintuitive outcome in certain forms of utilitarian thinking when applied to populations. It was famously formulated by philosopher Derek Parfit in his 1984 book, Reasons and Persons. The core idea of the repugnant conclusion is this: for any population of very happy people, there is a larger population whose existence would be better, even if the individuals in this larger population have lives that are barely worth living. Let's break that down. Imagine a world, let's call it World A, where there is a relatively small number of people, say 10 billion, and every single one of them lives an incredibly rich, fulfilling, and happy life. They experience profound joy, meaningful relationships, intellectual stimulation, and minimal suffering. This is a world of peak human flourishing. Now imagine another world, World Z. In World Z, there is an astronomically large number of people, let's say 1 trillion or a quadrillion or even more. Each person in World Z has a life that is just barely worth living. They experience a tiny, almost imperceptible amount of happiness, just enough to make their existence preferable to non-existence. Their lives are monotonous,
perhaps filled with repetitive, unchallenging tasks, and they experience very little joy or deep satisfaction. They are not actively suffering, but their lives are incredibly meager and dull. According to certain aggregate forms of utilitarianism, where the total sum of happiness is what matters, World Z would be considered morally superior to World A. Why? Because even though each individual in World Z has a life of minimal value, there are so many of them that the total sum of happiness, or utility, in World Z would vastly exceed the total sum of happiness in World A. If you add up 1 trillion tiny positive values, it will eventually surpass the sum of 10 billion very large positive values. This conclusion is called repugnant, precisely because it goes against our strong moral intuition. Most people would intuitively prefer World A, with its smaller population of deeply flourishing individuals, over World Z, with its unimaginably vast population of barely happy individuals. The idea that we should strive for a world where billions live lives of barely perceptible positive utility simply because there are so many of them feels deeply wrong. It seems to sacrifice quality of life for quantity of life in the most extreme way. Parfit argued that if we accept certain plausible premises about population ethics, like the idea that it's better to add a happy person to the world than not, or that a larger sum of good is better than a smaller sum, we seem to be logically led to this repugnant conclusion. It highlights a tension between average utility, how happy the average person is, and total utility, the sum total of happiness in the world. Total utilitarianism, when applied to population ethics, seems to push us towards the repugnant conclusion. The controversy isn't just academic. It has real-world implications for policies concerning population growth, resource allocation, and development aid. If we believe that adding more people, even if they are only marginally better off, is always a moral good, it could justify policies that lead to massive populations struggling at the brink of subsistence. The repugnant conclusion makes us question what we truly value. Is it the quality of individual lives or the sheer quantity of positive experience? Is there an inherent value in human flourishing that cannot be simply aggregated and outweighed by a multitude of lesser lives? It challenges our understanding of what constitutes a good world and what our moral obligations are towards future generations. To fall asleep contemplating the repugnant conclusion is to grapple with the dizzying mathematics of human value and the unsettling implications of seemingly rational ethical calculations. You might find your mind conjuring images of endless rows of people, each with a faint, almost imperceptible smile stretching into infinity, and wonder if that vast, diluted contentment could ever truly be better than the vibrant, profound joy of a select few. It's a thought experiment that can leave you feeling disoriented, questioning the very foundations of what we consider a desirable future. The controversy isn't just intellectual. It touches on our deepest sense of what makes life worth living, and whether a life barely worth living is truly a moral achievement or a tragic compromise. It's a lullaby that whispers about the overwhelming weight of numbers and how quantity can sometimes, disturbingly, overshadow quality. Let's jump into our next idea, the problem of suffering. From the abstract ethical dilemma of the repugnant conclusion, we transition to a problem that is anything but abstract, a raw and universal reality that has plagued humanity since the dawn of consciousness, the problem of suffering. This isn't just a philosophical puzzle, it's an existential agony, a visceral experience that cuts across cultures, beliefs, and time. It's the inescapable fact that pain, loss, disease, despair, and death are intrinsic parts of the human and indeed sentient condition.
The problem of suffering takes on particular urgency when considered in the context of a benevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient God. This is the classical problem of evil, or theodicy in theology. If God is all good, benevolent, all-powerful, omnipotent, and all-knowing, omniscient, why does suffering exist? If God is all good, he would want to prevent suffering. If God is all-powerful, he could prevent suffering. If God is all-knowing, he would know how to prevent suffering. Yet, suffering exists in abundance. This logical inconsistency poses a profound challenge to monotheistic faiths. How can one reconcile the existence of a loving God with the horrors of natural disasters, childhood cancer, genocide, and the countless daily agonies experienced by billions? The sheer scale and intensity of suffering, often seemingly random and undeserved, makes it difficult for many to maintain faith in such a deity. Philosophers and theologians have proposed numerous theodicies to try and resolve this apparent contradiction. 1. Free will defense. This argues that suffering, particularly moral evil, suffering caused by human actions, is a necessary consequence of granting humans free will. A world where humans could choose good but not evil would not be truly free. God values free will so highly that he permits the suffering that arises from its misuse. However, this doesn't fully explain natural evil, suffering from earthquakes, disease, etc., that isn't directly caused by human choice. 2. Soul-making theodicy. Proposed by John Hick, this suggests that suffering is necessary for character development and spiritual growth. The world is not a pleasure garden, but a soul-making environment where individuals learn compassion, courage, and resilience through adversity. Without challenges, we would remain morally and spiritually immature. Critics argue this implies a cruel God who orchestrates suffering for our benefit, and question if the amount and intensity of suffering is truly necessary for this purpose. 3. Higher purpose, inscrutable ways. Some argue that God's ways are beyond human comprehension, and there is a divine plan or greater good that we, with our limited understanding, cannot perceive. The suffering we see might be part of a larger, ultimately benevolent tapestry. This argument is often criticized as a God of the gaps explanation, or as simply giving up on rational inquiry. 4. Punishment for sin. This older view suggests suffering is a just punishment for humanity's sinfulness. This view is often rejected today for its harshness and for failing to explain the suffering of innocent children or animals. Beyond the theological context, the problem of suffering remains a central concern in secular philosophy. For those who don't believe in a divine creator, the question shifts from why does God allow suffering to why does suffering exist in a seemingly indifferent universe? Here, the problem isn't about reconciling a deity with evil, but about how to find meaning, purpose, or even just peace in a world where suffering is an undeniable and often overwhelming force. Philosophical traditions like Buddhism place suffering, dukkha, at the very center of their worldview, recognizing it as an inherent aspect of existence, arising from attachment and craving. Their path to enlightenment is often presented as a way to transcend suffering. Other philosophical pessimists, as we will explore, see suffering as evidence of life's inherent negativity. The problem of suffering challenges our optimism, our sense of justice, and our capacity for hope. It forces us to confront our own mortality, the fragility of happiness, and the limits of our control. It makes us ask uncomfortable questions about the value of life itself when it is so often intertwined with pain. How we respond to the problem of suffering profoundly shapes our worldview, our ethics, and our personal lives. Do we strive to eliminate it, embrace it, transcend it, or simply endure it? Do we find meaning in it, or is it fundamentally meaningless? To fall asleep contemplating the problem of suffering is to lie at the intersection of faith and despair, hope and resignation. Your mind might drift through the countless forms of pain, from the physical ache to the existential dread, and wonder if there is any grand design, any ultimate purpose, or if it is simply a cruel, indifferent feature of reality.
It can be a heavy contemplation, one that weighs on the soul, questioning the very fabric of goodness and justice in the universe. The controversy isn't just theological, it's deeply personal, challenging our comfort, our assumptions, and our deepest desires for a world free from pain. It's a lullaby that can either soothe with the promise of ultimate peace or keep you awake with the sheer, overwhelming burden of its reality. Let's jump into our next idea, Quietism. From the heavy burden of suffering, we turn to a philosophy that offers a profound, albeit controversial, response, Quietism. This term, while having specific historical and theological meanings, particularly within certain Christian mystical traditions of the 17th century, also carries a broader philosophical sense of disengagement, passivity, and inner stillness as a path to peace or spiritual truth. In its historical context, Quietism refers to a doctrine primarily associated with Miguel de Molinos and Madame Guyon that emphasized passive contemplation and the complete surrender of the individual will to God's will. The core idea was to achieve a state of perfect inner peace and union with God by ceasing all active striving, all personal desires, all intellectual activity, and even all specific acts of devotion. The Quietist aimed for a state of pure love, a passive resignation to whatever God decreed, without any self-interest, fear of hell, or hope of heaven. This meant not just accepting suffering, but embracing it as God's will, without complaint or even a desire for relief. It meant abandoning all self-initiated good works, all attempts to earn salvation, and simply existing in a state of utter passivity and receptivity. The idea was that true spiritual perfection lay in this complete self-annihilation where the soul became a blank slate for divine action.
The controversy surrounding historical Quietism was immense. The Catholic Church condemned it as heresy, fearing that its emphasis on passivity would lead to moral laxity, neglect of religious duties, and a dangerous disregard for free will and human agency. If all striving is to be abandoned, why pray? Why perform good deeds? Why resist temptation? Critics argued it led to a dangerous antinomianism, where moral rules no longer applied because one was simply passively receiving God's will. It also seemed to undermine the very concept of human responsibility and the active pursuit of virtue. Beyond its theological origins, Quietism can also be used in a broader philosophical sense to describe any stance that advocates for a radical disengagement from worldly affairs, a passive acceptance of reality, or a retreat from active engagement and striving. This might include epistemological Quietism, the view that certain philosophical problems are insoluble or meaningless, and we should simply stop trying to answer them, e.g. some interpretations of Wittgenstein's later philosophy. Political Quietism, the stance that one should not actively participate in political life or attempt to change social structures, perhaps due to a belief in the futility of such efforts or a focus on inner spiritual life. Existential Quietism, a general attitude of passive acceptance of one's fate, the world's imperfections, and the limitations of human agency, often as a response to existential angst or the problem of suffering. In this broader sense, Quietism offers a radical response to the problem of suffering and the anxieties of existence. If the world is inherently flawed, if human striving often leads to more pain, and if our efforts to control outcomes are ultimately futile, then perhaps the most rational and peaceful response is to simply let go, to cease the struggle, to relinquish control, to accept what is, without judgment or resistance. It's a philosophy that finds solace in surrender, in the profound peace that can come from giving up the fight. This broader Quietism can be seen as a form of detachment, a way of minimizing suffering by minimizing attachment to outcomes, desires, and even one's own ego. It shares some common ground with aspects of Stoicism, which emphasizes accepting what is beyond our control,
and certain Eastern philosophies, which advocate for non-attachment and the cessation of desire as paths to inner peace. However, even in its broader, secular sense, Quietism remains controversial. Critics argue that it can lead to apathy, complacency, and a lack of moral responsibility. If we passively accept everything, does that mean we should tolerate injustice, cruelty, and preventable suffering? Does it mean we should stop trying to improve the world, to fight for what is right, or to alleviate the pain of others? Many argue that human flourishing requires active engagement, striving for ideals, and taking responsibility for our actions and the state of the world. A purely passive existence, they contend, is not a truly human one. The allure of Quietism lies in its promise of profound peace, a release from the endless cycle of desire, effort, and disappointment. It offers a radical alternative to the relentless striving that characterizes much of modern life. To fall asleep contemplating Quietism is to seek a deep, almost transcendent stillness. You might imagine your mind emptying itself of all worries, all desires, all plans, surrendering to the present moment, to the simple fact of being. It's an attempt to quiet the inner chatter, to let go of the need to control, to understand, or even to feel intensely. The controversy isn't just about its historical condemnations. It's about the fundamental challenge it poses to our active, goal-oriented nature. Is true peace found in engagement or disengagement, in surrender? It's a lullaby that beckons you to let go, to float on the currents of existence without resistance, and to find a profound, if unsettling, calm in the absence of all struggle. Let's jump into our next idea, existential nihilism. From the passive surrender of Quietism, we now plunge into a philosophy that offers an even more radical and often terrifying form of resignation, existential nihilism. While nihilism is a broad term, existential nihilism specifically refers to the belief that life is without objective meaning, purpose, or intrinsic value. It's the stark realization that the universe, in its vast indifference, offers no preordained significance to our existence, our actions, or our suffering. This isn't just about feeling sad or hopeless. It's a philosophical conclusion. An existential nihilist believes that there is no grand plan, no divine creator, no inherent moral compass embedded in the cosmos. Our lives don't serve a higher purpose, nor do they contribute to any ultimate cosmic narrative. The universe simply is, and we, as conscious beings, are accidental byproducts of its indifferent processes. The implications are profound. If there is no objective meaning, no objective purpose, our goals, ambitions, and projects are ultimately arbitrary. We might create meaning for ourselves, but it's a subjective construct, not an inherent truth. No objective value. Things are not inherently good or bad. Morality becomes a human invention, a social construct, rather than a reflection of universal principles. There is no ultimate right or wrong. Existential nihilism differs from other forms of nihilism. Moral nihilism denies objective morality. Metaphysical nihilism might deny the existence of objects or even reality itself. Existential nihilism focuses specifically on the meaninglessness of existence. It's not necessarily a denial of reality, but a denial of its inherent significance for conscious beings.
This philosophy can arise from various sources. The scientific worldview, which explains the universe through impersonal laws and processes, can strip away traditional religious or spiritual explanations for meaning. The vastness of space and time, when contrasted with the fleeting brevity of human life, can make our endeavors seem infinitesimally small and ultimately insignificant. The problem of suffering, which we just discussed, can also lead to nihilism if one concludes that there is no benevolent force or higher purpose to justify or redeem the pain in the world. The experience of confronting existential nihilism can be deeply unsettling. It can lead to feelings of alienation, despair, and a profound sense of absurdity. If nothing ultimately matters, why do anything at all? Why strive? Why create?
Why love? Why even live? This is the abyss that nihilism opens up. However, it's important to distinguish between existential nihilism as a philosophical position and an emotional state of despair. While the realization of meaninglessness can lead to despair, some philosophers who grapple with nihilism, like Albert Camus, argue that it doesn't necessarily have to. Camus, for instance, accepted the absurd, the conflict between our human need for meaning and the universe's silence, but argued that we can rebel against it by creating our own meaning, embracing life's experiences, and living passionately in the face of meaninglessness. This isn't a denial of nihilism, but an active response to it. Critics often argue that existential nihilism is a dangerous and destructive philosophy, leading to apathy, amorality, or even self-destruction. They might contend that even if meaning is not objectively given, humans have a fundamental need for it, and creating subjective meaning is not only possible, but essential for a flourishing life. Many find solace in community, relationships, art, or personal projects, arguing that these provide sufficient meaning regardless of whether the universe cares. Others might argue that the very act of questioning meaning implies a desire for it, and that this desire itself points to some inherent value in the search. They might also suggest that denying objective meaning is a premature conclusion, and that perhaps meaning exists in ways we haven't yet fully grasped. Despite its bleak reputation, confronting existential nihilism can also be liberating. If there are no preordained paths, no cosmic judgments, then we are free to define our own values, create our own purposes, and live authentically according to our own chosen meanings. It can strip away false comforts and force us to take full responsibility for the lives we build. To fall asleep contemplating existential nihilism is to lie in a vast, silent cosmic void, where the stars twinkle with indifferent light, and your own existence feels like a fleeting, unscripted improvisation. Your mind might drift through the sheer arbitrariness of everything, the lack of ultimate consequence, the echo of your own thoughts as the only source of meaning. It can be a profoundly lonely and unsettling journey, but also one that offers a strange, stark freedom. The controversy isn't just in its conclusions, but in how it forces us to confront our deepest fears about insignificance and the possibility that our most cherished hopes and dreams are ultimately just self-made illusions. It's a lullaby that whispers of the ultimate silence, the profound emptiness that underlies all sound and fury, leaving you to wonder what, if anything, truly matters before you drift into the oblivion of sleep. Let's jump into our next idea, the meaning of suffering. Having grappled with the raw reality of suffering and the potential meaninglessness of existence in existential nihilism, we now turn to a question that tries to bridge these two, the meaning of suffering. Is suffering merely a senseless torment, or can it hold some deeper significance? This question has been central to religious, philosophical, and psychological inquiry for millennia. For many, suffering is inherently negative. It's something to be avoided, minimized, and eradicated. From a purely biological perspective, pain is an evolutionary mechanism to warn us of danger and prevent further harm. From a utilitarian standpoint, suffering is a disutility that should be reduced. And from the perspective of Antinatilsim or Efilism, it's the ultimate reason to prevent or end all life. However, numerous traditions and thinkers have argued that suffering can, paradoxically, be a profound source of meaning, growth, and even transformation. It's not that suffering is good in itself, but that something good can emerge from it or through it. Here are some ways in which the meaning of suffering is explored. 1. Catalyst for growth and wisdom. This is a common theme. Adversity, loss, and hardship can force individuals to confront their limitations, reevaluate their values, and develop resilience, empathy, and wisdom. As the saying goes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Suffering can strip away superficialities, revealing deeper truths about oneself and the world. It can lead to profound self-discovery and a deeper appreciation for life's joys. 2. Source of empathy and connection. Experiencing suffering can foster a profound sense of empathy for others who are also suffering. It can break down barriers between people, creating a shared understanding and a desire to alleviate the pain of others. Many humanitarian efforts are born from a deep connection to the suffering of others. 3. Spiritual or religious significance. In many religious traditions, suffering is seen as having a divine purpose. Christianity. Suffering can be seen as a participation in Christ's suffering, a path to purification, or a test of faith. It can draw individuals closer to God and prepare them for an afterlife where all suffering will cease. Buddhism. While Buddhism seeks to end suffering, dukkha, it also sees suffering as the fundamental reality that awakens us to the impermanence of existence and the cycle of craving, thereby motivating us towards enlightenment.
Judaism. Suffering can be seen as a consequence of human actions, a test, or a mysterious part of God's plan that ultimately serves a greater good. 4. Meaning-making through response. Existentialists, even those who acknowledge the absurd meaninglessness of the universe, often argue that we create meaning through our response to suffering. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, developed logotherapy, which posits that meaning can be found even in the most horrific circumstances, by choosing one's attitude and finding purpose in the face of unavoidable suffering. It's not the suffering itself that has meaning, but our freedom to choose how we react to it and what purpose we assign to it. 5. Aesthetic or artistic inspiration. Suffering has been a perennial source of inspiration for art, literature, music, and poetry. Artists often channel their pain into creative works that resonate deeply with others, transforming personal anguish into universal beauty or truth. In this sense, suffering can contribute to the richness of human culture. 6. A boundary-defining experience. Suffering, particularly the experience of loss or mortality, can clarify what truly matters in life. It can make us appreciate the fleeting nature of happiness and the preciousness of relationships, prompting us to live more fully and authentically. The controversy surrounding the meaning of suffering often arises from the tension between these perspectives. To those who are actively experiencing immense pain, the idea that their suffering has a meaning can feel dismissive, insensitive, or even cruel. It can sound like a justification for their pain rather than an attempt to alleviate it. The sheer scale of pointless suffering, the suffering of innocent children, animals, or victims of random tragedy, makes it incredibly difficult for many to accept any inherent meaning in it. Critics also argue that attributing meaning to suffering can lead to a dangerous complacency or even a romanticization of pain, potentially hindering efforts to prevent or alleviate it. If suffering is good for the soul, why bother trying to cure diseases or end poverty? This is a misinterpretation, as most who find meaning in suffering still advocate for its alleviation where possible. The search for meaning is often an internal process, an attempt to cope with unavoidable pain, rather than a justification for inaction. Ultimately, the question of the meaning of suffering is deeply personal. For some, it is a meaningless burden to be overcome. For others, it is a crucible, a teacher, or a path to deeper understanding. It forces us to confront our deepest vulnerabilities and to define what gives our lives purpose in the face of inevitable adversity. To fall asleep contemplating the meaning of suffering is to delve into the very core of human resilience and vulnerability. You might find yourself drifting through memories of past hardships, reflecting on how they shaped you, or imagining the profound struggles of others. It's a contemplation that can be heavy, but also strangely hopeful, offering the possibility that even in the darkest moments, there might be a seed of growth, a flicker of understanding, or a profound connection to something larger than oneself. The controversy isn't about denying its existence, but about whether we can extract anything of value from it, or if it is purely a force of destruction.
It's a lullaby that whispers of the lessons learned in the shadows, and how even pain, sometimes, strangely, lead us towards a deeper peace. Let's jump into our next idea, the absurd. From the search for meaning in suffering, we now turn to a concept that highlights the lack of inherent meaning, yet offers a peculiar path to freedom and rebellion. The absurd. This idea, prominently explored by existentialist philosophers like Albert Camus, describes the fundamental conflict between humanity's innate drive to find meaning, purpose, and clarity in the universe, and the universe's utter, cold indifference and silence. The absurd is not an inherent quality of the universe itself, nor is it merely a human desire. It arises from the confrontation between these two forces. We are creatures hardwired to ask why. We seek patterns, reasons, and ultimate significance. We crave a narrative for our lives, a sense that our existence matters in some grand scheme. Yet the cosmos offers no such narrative. It doesn't care about our hopes, our fears, our suffering, or our search for truth. It simply is. Camus famously used the myth of Sisyphus to illustrate the absurd. Sisyphus is condemned by the gods to eternally push a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down each time he reaches the top. His labor is futile, repetitive, and ultimately meaningless. This, Camus suggests, is a metaphor for human existence. We strive, we build, we love, we create, only for it all to eventually crumble, decay, and be forgotten in the vast expanse of time. Our endeavors, from a cosmic perspective, are as pointless as Sisyphus's rock. The realization of the absurd can be deeply unsettling, leading to what Camus called the revolt of the flesh. It can provoke despair, a sense of alienation, and a profound existential crisis. If life is meaningless, why continue? This is where the absurd confronts us with three possible responses. 1. Suicide, to end the absurd by ending oneself. Camus rejects this, arguing it's an escape, not a true confrontation. It doesn't resolve the absurd, it merely dissolves the one experiencing it. 2. Philosophical suicide, leap of faith, to embrace a religious or spiritual belief system that provides a ready-made meaning for life. This is also rejected by Camus as an escape, a denial of the absurd by taking a leap into unreason. It's a comfortable illusion that avoids the difficult truth.
3. Rebellion, acceptance. This is Camus' proposed solution: to acknowledge the absurd, to live fully in the face of it, and to rebel against its implications, not by finding meaning, but by creating it through our actions and our embrace of life. This means consciousness, staying keenly aware of the absurd, never letting go of the tension between our desire for meaning and the universe's silence. Revolt, constantly challenging the absurd through our actions, our creativity, our passions. We don't find meaning, we create it in the moment through our choices and experiences. Freedom, recognizing that if nothing has objective meaning, then we are utterly free to choose our own values and live authentically, without external justification. This is a terrifying but also liberating freedom. Passion, embracing life's experiences with intensity, even if they are fleeting and ultimately insignificant. The quantity of experiences, not their ultimate purpose, becomes paramount. Camus famously concludes that one must imagine Sisyphus happy, not happy because he has found meaning in his task, but happy because he has embraced his fate, recognized its futility, and, through that recognition, asserted his own humanity and freedom. He has found joy in the act of pushing, in the struggle itself, despite the lack of ultimate purpose. The controversy surrounding the absurd lies in its radical challenge to traditional notions of meaning and purpose. For many, life without objective meaning is simply unbearable. They might argue that Camus' rebellion is just a sophisticated way of creating subjective meaning, which is still a form of meaning, and thus not truly embracing meaninglessness.
Others might find the idea of embracing futility inherently depressing, preferring to cling to hope or faith. Critics also question whether a life lived in constant awareness of the absurd can truly be a fulfilling one. Is it sustainable to perpetually live in tension with the universe's indifference? Does it not lead to a kind of quiet despair, even if disguised as rebellion? Yet, for those who resonate with the concept, the absurd offers a powerful framework for living authentically in a post-religious, scientific world. It frees us from the burden of finding a preordained purpose and empowers us to forge our own. It's a call to courage, to live intensely, and to find joy in the ephemeral moments of existence, precisely because they are all we have. To fall asleep contemplating the absurd is to lie at the precipice of meaning and meaninglessness, watching the cosmic dance with a mixture of awe and bewilderment. Your mind might drift through the vastness of the universe, the fleeting nature of your own life, and the strange, defiant joy of simply being. It's a contemplation that can be deeply liberating, stripping away the weight of expectation and external validation, leaving you with the stark beauty of your own chosen path. The controversy isn't about whether the universe is indifferent, but about how we, as meaning-seeking creatures, should respond to that indifference. It's a lullaby that whispers of the freedom found in letting go of ultimate answers and finding peace in the simple, defiant act of living, even if it's just for the night. Let's jump into our next idea, life as a cosmic accident. Building on the indifference of the universe highlighted by the absurd, we now turn to a more explicit articulation of our place within it, life as a cosmic accident. This perspective is a direct consequence of a scientific, naturalistic worldview, particularly in the fields of astronomy, physics, and evolutionary biology. It posits that life, and indeed all life on Earth, is not the result of divine design, preordained purpose, or special creation, but rather a fortunate, improbable, and ultimately accidental outcome of impersonal physical and chemical processes. The arguments for life as a cosmic accident typically draw from several scientific understandings. 1. The Big Bang and cosmic evolution. The universe began with a singularity, expanded, cooled, and evolved according to fundamental laws of physics. Stars formed, created heavier elements through nuclear fusion, and eventually exploded, scattering these elements into space. Our solar system, including Earth, formed from such a cloud of gas and dust. There's no inherent direction or purpose in this grand cosmic narrative. It's a sequence of cause and effect. 2. Planetary formation and conditions. Earth's unique conditions, its distance from the Sun, its size, its molten core generating a magnetic field, the presence of liquid water, a stable atmosphere, are all necessary for life as we know it. While these conditions might seem just right, from a cosmic perspective, they are the result of a long chain of random gravitational interactions, collisions, and geological processes. The universe is vast, containing billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars, and the sheer number of planets makes it statistically probable that somewhere the right conditions would arise by chance. 3. Abiogenesis and evolution. The transition from non-living matter to the first living organisms, abiogenesis, is still not fully understood, but scientific theories propose naturalistic pathways involving complex chemical reactions. Once life emerged, it diversified and evolved through natural selection, mutation, and adaptation over billions of years. This process is driven by random genetic changes and environmental pressures, not by any conscious design or predetermined goal. Humans are merely one branch on a vast evolutionary tree, sharing common ancestry with all other life forms. 4. The anthropic principle, weak form. While some interpret the fine-tuning of the universe's physical constants as evidence for design, the weak anthropic principle offers an alternative explanation consistent with cosmic accident. It states that the universe must have properties that allow for the existence of observers, because if it didn't, we wouldn't be here to observe it. In a multiverse scenario, where countless universes with different physical constants exist, it's inevitable that some would have the right conditions for life, and we simply happen to be in one of them.
The implication of life being a cosmic accident is that there is no inherent external meaning or purpose to our existence. We are not chosen, special, or created for a reason beyond the physical processes that brought us forth. Our consciousness, our intelligence, our capacity for love and suffering, all are emergent properties of complex biological systems, which themselves are products of billions of years of random chance and natural selection. This perspective can be profoundly humbling and, for some, deeply unsettling. It strips away comforting narratives of divine purpose, cosmic destiny, or human exceptionalism. It reinforces the idea of existential nihilism, suggesting that if we are merely accidental, then any meaning we find must be self-created, subjective, and ultimately fleeting. The controversy around life as a cosmic accident often stems from its perceived conflict with religious beliefs, which typically posit a creator and a divine plan. For many, the idea of being an accident is emotionally unsatisfying and spiritually barren. It can lead to feelings of insignificance, despair, or a sense that life is ultimately pointless. Critics might argue that even if the mechanisms of life's emergence are accidental, the result, conscious, complex, self-aware beings, is so extraordinary that it demands a deeper explanation than mere chance. They might point to the incredible complexity of life, or the subjective experience of consciousness, as phenomena that are difficult to fully explain through purely accidental processes. Some also contend that even if we are a cosmic accident, that doesn't diminish the value we create for ourselves, or the meaning we find in our relationships and endeavors. However, for others, embracing life as a cosmic accident can be profoundly liberating. It frees us from the burden of fulfilling a preordained purpose and allows us to define our own values and create our own meaning. It fosters a deep sense of awe at the sheer improbability of our existence and the beauty of the universe's indifferent majesty. It can inspire a profound sense of responsibility to care for this accidental, precious life and the unique planet that harbors it. It emphasizes the present moment and the intrinsic value of experience, rather than deferring meaning to an afterlife or a grand cosmic plan. To fall asleep contemplating life as a cosmic accident is to immerse yourself in the vast, silent tapestry of the universe, where your own existence feels like a fleeting, improbable spark against an infinite backdrop. Your mind might drift through the eons of cosmic history, the random collisions of atoms, the slow dance of galaxies, and wonder at the sheer, beautiful improbability of you being here, now. It's a contemplation that can be both terrifying in its implication of insignificance and strangely empowering in its liberation from external purpose. The controversy isn't about denying scientific facts, but about how we integrate those facts into our understanding of self, meaning, and our place in the cosmos. It's a lullaby that whispers of the magnificent, indifferent dance of creation, and the precious, accidental gift of consciousness that allows us to witness it, if only for a moment. Let's jump into our next idea, the hedonistic treadmill. From the grand cosmic scale of accidental life, we now zoom in on a very human psychological phenomenon that profoundly impacts our pursuit of happiness, the hedonistic treadmill, also known as hedonic adaptation. This concept describes the observed tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness, despite major positive or negative changes or events in their lives. Imagine you get a huge promotion, win the lottery, or fall deeply in love.
Initially, you experience a surge of intense joy and happiness. Your mood soars. But over time, the novelty wears off, you adapt to your new circumstances, and your happiness levels gradually revert to your personal baseline. Conversely, imagine a significant negative event, a job loss, a breakup, or even a serious injury. Initially, your happiness plummets. But again, with time, you adapt, cope, and your mood tends to return to its original set point. The metaphor of a treadmill is apt. You're constantly running, striving for more, achieving goals, acquiring possessions, pursuing new experiences, but despite all the effort, you largely stay in the same place in terms of your overall long-term happiness. The goalposts keep moving. What once brought immense pleasure becomes the new normal, and you need something more or different to get that same hit of happiness. This phenomenon has been supported by psychological research. Studies have shown that lottery winners, after an initial period of euphoria, are often no happier than they were before their win, and sometimes even less happy due to new stresses. Similarly, people who experience serious accidents that lead to paralysis, while initially devastated, often regain a significant portion of their baseline happiness after a period of adjustment. The mechanisms behind the hedonistic treadmill are thought to involve 1. Adaptation. Our brains are wired to adapt to constant stimuli. What once was novel and exciting becomes routine. This is an efficient way for our brains to conserve energy and focus on new threats or opportunities. 2. Rising expectations. As our circumstances improve, our expectations for what constitutes a good life also rise. What once was a luxury becomes a necessity, and we need even more to feel satisfied. 3. Social comparison. We constantly compare ourselves to others. As we achieve more, our reference group might shift, leading us to compare ourselves to even more successful individuals, thus diminishing our sense of achievement. The implications of the hedonistic treadmill are profound for how we understand and pursue happiness. 1. Challenging materialism. It suggests that the relentless pursuit of material possessions or external achievements might be a futile endeavor for long-term happiness. While these things can provide temporary boosts, they don't fundamentally alter our enduring sense of well-being.
Focusing on intrinsic versus extrinsic goals. It encourages a shift from extrinsic goals, money, status, possessions, to intrinsic goals, personal growth, meaningful relationships, community contribution, autonomy, which are often found to provide more sustained satisfaction. The value of non-hedonic well-being. It prompts questions about whether happiness, pleasure, absence of pain, is the only or most important component of a good life. Perhaps meaning, purpose, engagement, and flourishing, eudaimonia, are more enduring and less susceptible to the treadmill effect. Mindfulness and gratitude. Practices that encourage savoring the present moment and appreciating what one has, rather than constantly striving for more, can be seen as ways to counteract the treadmill. The controversy around the hedonistic treadmill isn't about denying its existence, but about its interpretation and what it implies for human striving. Some might find it a depressing concept, suggesting that true, lasting happiness is an illusion, and that we are perpetually doomed to a state of mild contentment, regardless of our efforts. This can fuel a sense of futility or existential resignation. Critics might also argue that the treadmill isn't absolute. While a baseline exists, individuals can make choices and cultivate habits that genuinely shift their set point upwards over time, or at least experience more frequent and intense positive emotions. Factors like engaging in flow activities, strong social connections, acts of altruism, and finding purpose can contribute to more sustained well-being that goes beyond mere adaptation. They might also argue that striving for improvement, even if it doesn't lead to permanent happiness, is still a valuable and motivating force for progress and personal development.
Despite these nuances, the hedonistic treadmill serves as a powerful reminder of the limitations of external circumstances in dictating our inner state. It encourages us to look inward, to cultivate resilience, and to find contentment not in the acquisition of things, but in the quality of our experiences and relationships. To fall asleep contemplating the hedonistic treadmill is to reflect on the endless cycle of human desire and satisfaction. You might find yourself replaying moments of past triumphs and disappointments, observing how quickly the glow faded, or how surprisingly resilient you were in the face of adversity. It's a contemplation that can strip away the illusion of ultimate satisfaction, leaving you with a profound sense of the fleeting nature of pleasure and the enduring power of adaptation. The controversy isn't whether we adapt, but what that adaptation means for our pursuit of a good life, and whether true peace lies in breaking free from the treadmill's relentless pace or simply acknowledging its rhythm. It's a lullaby that whispers of the impermanence of joy and the quiet contentment found not in having more, but in needing less. Let's jump into our next idea, philosophical pessimism. From the cycle of fleeting happiness on the hedonistic treadmill, we now arrive at a worldview that directly challenges the very notion of life's inherent goodness, philosophical pessimism. This isn't just about feeling sad or having a bad day. It's a systematic philosophical position that life is, on the whole, bad, or at least fundamentally undesirable, fraught with suffering and ultimately meaningless. It stands in stark contrast to philosophical optimism, which views life as inherently good and worth living. Philosophical pessimists often argue from several key perspectives. 1. The primacy of suffering. As we've seen with antinatalism and negative utilitarianism, a central tenet is that suffering is a more potent and pervasive force than happiness. Life inevitably brings pain, loss, disease, disappointment, and death. Even moments of joy are fleeting and often overshadowed by the specter of future suffering or the memory of past pain. Arthur Schopenhauer, perhaps the most famous philosophical pessimist, argued that desire is the root of all suffering. We are constantly striving, and even when a desire is fulfilled, it is quickly replaced by new desires or by boredom, leading to a perpetual state of dissatisfaction. 2. The asymmetry argument. Again, echoing Benatar, pessimists often emphasize that the absence of suffering is good, even if not experienced, while the absence of happiness is not bad. The presence of suffering is bad, while the presence of happiness is good. Given this, it is always better not to exist, as existence guarantees suffering, while non-existence guarantees no suffering and no deprivation of happiness. 3. The futility of striving. If the hedonistic treadmill is real and true lasting happiness is elusive, then much of human striving is ultimately futile. We run, but we stay in place. Our goals and ambitions, while providing temporary distraction, don't lead to a fundamental improvement in our overall well-being. From a cosmic perspective, as existential nihilism suggests, our efforts are also ultimately insignificant. 4. The inherent flaws of existence. Pessimists might point to the brutal realities of the natural world: predation, disease, scarcity, the inherent conflicts within human societies, war, injustice, cruelty, and the fundamental limitations of our own bodies and minds, aging, sickness, death, as evidence that life is designed to be a struggle rather than a pleasure. 5. The absurdity of meaning. If there is no objective meaning or purpose to life, as with the absurd and cosmic accident, then any meaning we create for ourselves is ultimately a subjective illusion, a fragile construct against an indifferent universe. This can lead to the conclusion that life is ultimately meaningless and therefore, in a profound sense, not worth living. Philosophical pessimism is often seen as a challenging and uncomfortable worldview because it directly confronts our innate desire for hope, purpose, and happiness. It asks us to look squarely at the darker aspects of existence without sugarcoating them. It's important to distinguish philosophical pessimism from clinical depression. While there can be overlaps, philosophical pessimism is a reasoned intellectual stance, not merely an emotional state. A philosophical pessimist might still experience joy and pleasure, but they view these as temporary respites within a fundamentally undesirable existence.
The implications of philosophical pessimism are profound. If life is inherently bad, then antinatalism, procreation becomes ethically questionable, as it condemns new beings to suffering. Resignation/quietism, a passive acceptance of suffering and a disengagement from worldly striving, might be seen as the most rational response. Focus on alleviation. The primary moral imperative shifts to minimizing suffering, negative utilitarianism, rather than maximizing happiness. The controversy surrounding philosophical pessimism is immense. Critics argue that it is overly bleak, nihilistic, and fails to appreciate the profound beauty, love, creativity, and joy that life can offer. They contend that focusing solely on suffering ignores the vast spectrum of positive human experience. Many believe that even in the face of suffering, the act of living, striving, and connecting is inherently valuable. Others argue that philosophical pessimism can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, leading to a lack of motivation and diminished capacity to experience joy. If you believe life is bad, you might be less likely to seek out good experiences or to make an effort to improve your circumstances. However, proponents argue that pessimism can be a powerful tool for realism and intellectual honesty. By acknowledging the darker truths of existence, one can strip away false comforts and illusions, leading to a more authentic and grounded perspective. It can foster a deep sense of compassion for all who suffer and a strong motivation to alleviate pain. Paradoxically, some philosophical pessimists find a certain tranquility in accepting the worst, as it removes the burden of unrealistic expectations for happiness. To fall asleep contemplating philosophical pessimism is to lie in the quiet acceptance of life's inherent struggles, to let go of the relentless pursuit of an elusive happiness, and to find a strange, stark peace in the recognition of suffering as a fundamental truth. Your mind might drift through the futility of ambition, the inevitability of loss, and the quiet dignity of simply enduring. It can be a profoundly sobering contemplation, one that challenges every instinct to hope and strive, but also one that offers a release from the pressure to always be happy. The controversy isn't just about whether life is good or bad, but about how we choose to face that question, and what kind of peace, if any, can be found in the embrace of its darker answers. It's a lullaby that whispers that the greatest peace might come not from joy, but from the quiet cessation of suffering, or even the quiet acceptance of its presence. Let's jump into our next idea, eco-philosophy. From the introspective depths of philosophical pessimism, we now broaden our scope to encompass the relationship between humanity and the entire living world, moving into the realm of eco-philosophy. This is a vast and diverse field of thought that critically examines the conceptual foundations of environmental problems and explores new ethical, metaphysical, and epistemological frameworks for understanding and interacting with nature. It's not just about conservation, it's about fundamentally rethinking humanity's place in the cosmos. At its core, eco-philosophy challenges anthropocentrism, the belief that humans are the central or most significant entities in the world, and that human interests take precedent over all others. Instead, it often advocates for a more biocentric, life-centered, or ecocentric, ecosystem worldview, where all life forms and ecological systems have intrinsic value independent of their utility to humans.
Key themes and branches within eco-philosophy include 1. Deep ecology. Coined by R. Nass, deep ecology argues for a radical shift in human consciousness and values. It distinguishes itself from shallow ecology, which focuses on fighting pollution and resource depletion for human benefit, by advocating for the inherent worth of all living beings and the interconnectedness of all life. Deep ecologists believe that humans are just one strand in the web of life, and that we need to drastically reduce our impact on the planet, even if it means fundamental changes to our way of life. 2. Environmental ethics. This branch explores moral questions concerning human interactions with the natural world. It asks, do trees have rights? Do animals have moral standing? What are our obligations to future generations regarding environmental preservation? It challenges traditional ethical frameworks that often only consider human interests. 3. Ecofeminism. This perspective draws connections between the domination of nature and the domination of women, arguing that both stem from similar patriarchal and hierarchical modes of thought. It seeks to dismantle oppressive structures that exploit both women and the environment. 4. Environmental justice. This focuses on the disproportionate impact of environmental degradation on marginalized communities, highlighting how environmental issues are intertwined with social and economic inequality. 5. Re-enchantment of nature. Some eco-philosophers seek to restore a sense of wonder, sacredness, and spiritual connection to the natural world, countering the purely mechanistic and utilitarian view of nature often found in modern industrial society. 6. Critique of industrialism and consumerism. Many eco-philosophies critically examine the economic and social systems that drive environmental destruction, arguing that capitalism, consumerism, and unchecked technological growth are fundamentally unsustainable. The implications of eco-philosophy are immense. If adopted, it would require a radical transformation of human society, including shift in values, moving away from growth-oriented economies to sustainable, regenerative practices, reduced consumption, embracing simpler lifestyles and consuming far fewer resources, population control. Some eco-philosophers, like VHMT, see human overpopulation as a primary driver of ecological collapse, legal rights for nature, granting legal personhood or rights to rivers, forests, or species, re-evaluation of technology, questioning the uncritical embrace of technology and its environmental footprint. The controversy surrounding eco-philosophy is substantial because it challenges deeply ingrained anthropocentric assumptions and often demands fundamental changes to our economic, political, and personal lives. Critics often argue that it's anti-human. Some perceive eco-philosophy, especially deep ecology, as misanthropic or anti-human, prioritizing the environment over human well-being and development. They might argue that human ingenuity is the solution.
Impractical and unrealistic. The radical changes proposed are often seen as politically and economically unfeasible, clashing with global capitalism and the aspirations of developing nations. Lack of consensus on value. The idea of intrinsic value in nature is difficult for some to accept, especially those who adhere to purely utilitarian or anthropocentric ethics. How do we objectively measure the value of a species or an ecosystem? Potential for authoritarianism. Some worry that radical environmental goals could lead to authoritarian policies that restrict individual freedoms in the name of ecological preservation. Despite these criticisms, eco-philosophy has profoundly influenced environmental movements, policy debates, and our understanding of the interconnectedness of life. It forces us to confront the long-term consequences of our actions and to consider our moral responsibilities not just to other humans but to the entire planet. It offers a vision of humanity living in harmony and respect with the natural world, rather than in domination over it.
To fall asleep contemplating eco-philosophy is to imagine a world where the boundaries between human and non-human blur, where the whispers of the wind through trees carry as much weight as human discourse, and where the health of the planet is paramount. Your mind might drift through visions of pristine wilderness, regenerated ecosystems, and a humanity that has learned to live in humble balance. It can be a deeply calming thought, imagining a world restored to its natural splendor, free from human exploitation. The controversy isn't about loving nature, but about what fundamental changes we are willing to make to our own lives and societies to truly protect it, and whether humanity can ever truly shed its anthropocentric skin. It's a lullaby that whispers of the interconnectedness of all life and the profound peace found in becoming a humble part of the grand ecological tapestry. Let's jump into our next idea, existential loneliness. From the grand, interconnected tapestry of eco-philosophy, we now turn inward to one of the most intimate and profound human experiences, existential loneliness. This isn't the temporary feeling of being alone or socially isolated, which can be remedied by company. Rather, existential loneliness is a fundamental, inescapable condition of human existence, the profound realization that each individual is ultimately alone in their subjective experience, their consciousness, and their confrontation with life. It's the sense that no matter how close we are to others, no matter how deeply we love or are loved, there remains an unbridgeable gap between our inner world and theirs. No one can fully know our thoughts, our feelings, our unique perspective on reality. We are born alone and we die alone. This aloneness is not a deficit to be overcome, but an inherent aspect of being a conscious, self-aware individual. Key aspects of existential loneliness include 1. Subjectivity of experience. Our perceptions, emotions, and interpretations of the world are uniquely our own. While we can communicate and empathize, we can never truly step inside another person's mind and experience reality exactly as they do. This creates a fundamental isolation of consciousness. 2. Unshareable burden of freedom and responsibility. As existentialist thinkers emphasize, we are condemned to be free. We are responsible for our choices, our values, and the meaning we create or fail to create in our lives. This responsibility is ultimately ours alone. No one else can make these fundamental decisions for us or bear the weight of their consequences in the same way. 3. Confrontation with ultimate questions. Each individual must confront the big questions of life, death, meaning, and purpose on their own terms. While we can seek guidance and share ideas, the ultimate answers, or the acceptance of no answers, are deeply personal and cannot be fully outsourced. 4. Awareness of mortality. The knowledge of our own inevitable death is a deeply personal and isolating realization. While others may grieve us, they cannot die our death for us. This ultimate separation underscores our existential aloneness. 5. The absurdity of existence. As we discussed, the universe is indifferent to our existence. There is no external inherent meaning. This confrontation with cosmic indifference can amplify the feeling of existential loneliness, as it suggests we are fundamentally alone in a vast, uncaring cosmos. Existential loneliness is often distinguished from social loneliness. Social loneliness is painful and can be alleviated by social connection. Existential loneliness, while it can certainly evoke feelings of sadness or anxiety, is a deeper, more philosophical realization. It's a recognition of a fundamental truth about the human condition rather than a temporary state of deprivation. The implications of existential loneliness are profound. It can lead to anxiety and dread. The realization of ultimate aloneness can be a source of deep anxiety, particularly the dread of death and the responsibility of freedom. 2. Search for connection. Paradoxically, the awareness of existential loneliness can intensify our desire for genuine human connection, even while acknowledging its limits. We strive to bridge the gap even if it's never fully possible. 3. Self-reliance and authenticity. Embracing existential loneliness can foster self-reliance and encourage us to live authentically, defining our own values and purposes rather than seeking external validation. 4. appreciation of fleeting moments. It can lead to a deeper appreciation for the preciousness of shared experiences and moments of connection, precisely because they are temporary and never fully complete. The controversy surrounding existential loneliness often centers on whether it is a universal truth to be accepted or a pathological state to be overcome. Some might argue that it is overly pessimistic, or that true empathy and connection can bridge the gap between individuals, making the claim of absolute aloneness an exaggeration. Religious perspectives often offer solace by positing a connection to a divine being or a community of believers, which can mitigate feelings of ultimate aloneness.
Impractical and unrealistic. The radical changes proposed are often seen as politically and economically unfeasible, clashing with global capitalism and the aspirations of developing nations. Lack of consensus on value. The idea of intrinsic value in nature is difficult for some to accept, especially those who adhere to purely utilitarian or anthropocentric ethics. How do we objectively measure the value of a species or an ecosystem? Potential for authoritarianism. Some worry that radical environmental goals could lead to authoritarian policies that restrict individual freedoms in the name of ecological preservation. Despite these criticisms, eco-philosophy has profoundly influenced environmental movements, policy debates, and our understanding of the interconnectedness of life. It forces us to confront the long-term consequences of our actions and to consider our moral responsibilities not just to other humans, but to the entire planet. It offers a vision of humanity living in harmony and respect with the natural world, rather than in domination over it. To fall asleep contemplating eco-philosophy is to imagine a world where the boundaries between human and non-human blur, where the whispers of the wind through trees carry as much weight as human discourse, and where the health of the planet is paramount. Your mind might drift through visions of pristine wilderness, regenerated ecosystems, and a humanity that has learned to live in humble balance. It can be a deeply calming thought, imagining a world restored to its natural splendor, free from human exploitation. The controversy isn't about loving nature, but about what fundamental changes we are willing to make to our own lives and societies to truly protect it, and whether humanity can ever truly shed its anthropocentric skin. It's a lullaby that whispers of the interconnectedness of all life and the profound peace found in becoming a humble part of the grand ecological tapestry. Let's jump into our next idea: existential loneliness. From the grand interconnected tapestry of eco-philosophy, we now turn inward to one of the most intimate and profound human experiences: existential loneliness. This isn't the temporary feeling of being alone or socially isolated, which can be remedied by company. Rather, existential loneliness is a fundamental, inescapable condition of human existence, the profound realization that each individual is ultimately alone in their subjective experience, their consciousness, and their confrontation with life's ultimate questions. It's the sense that no matter how close we are to others, no matter how deeply we love or are loved, there remains an unbridgeable gap between our inner world and theirs. No one can fully know our thoughts, our feelings, our unique perspective on reality. We are born alone and we die alone. This aloneness is not a deficit to be overcome, but an inherent aspect of being a conscious, self-aware individual. Key aspects of existential loneliness include: 1. Subjectivity of experience. Our perceptions, emotions, and interpretations of the world are uniquely our own. While we can communicate and empathize, we can never truly step inside another person's mind and experience reality exactly as they do. This creates a fundamental isolation of consciousness. 2. Unshareable burden of freedom and responsibility. As existentialist thinkers emphasize, we are condemned to be free. We are responsible for our choices, our values, and the meaning we create or fail to create in our lives. This responsibility is ultimately ours alone.
No one else can make these fundamental decisions for us or bear the weight of their consequences in the same way. 3. Confrontation with ultimate questions. Each individual must confront the big questions of life, death, meaning, and purpose on their own terms. While we can seek guidance and share ideas, the ultimate answers, or the acceptance of no answers, are deeply personal and cannot be fully outsourced. 4. Awareness of mortality. The knowledge of our own inevitable death is a deeply personal and isolating realization. While others may grieve us, they cannot die our death for us. This ultimate separation underscores our existential aloneness. 5. The absurdity of existence. As we discussed, the universe is indifferent to our existence. There is no external, inherent meaning. This confrontation with cosmic indifference can amplify the feeling of existential loneliness. Existential loneliness is often distinguished from social loneliness. Social loneliness is painful and can be alleviated by social connection. Existential loneliness, while it can certainly evoke feelings of sadness or anxiety, is a deeper, more philosophical realization. It's a recognition of a fundamental truth about the human condition, rather than a temporary state of deprivation. The implications of existential loneliness are profound. It can lead to anxiety and dread. The realization of ultimate aloneness can be a source of deep anxiety, particularly the dread of death and the responsibility of freedom. Search for connection. Paradoxically, the awareness of existential loneliness can intensify our desire for genuine human connection, even while acknowledging its limits. We strive to bridge the gap, even if it's never fully possible. Self-reliance and authenticism. Embracing existential loneliness can foster self-reliance and encourage us to live authentically, defining our own values and purposes rather than seeking external validation. Preciousness of fleeting moments. It can lead to a deeper appreciation for the preciousness of shared experiences and moments of connection precisely because they are temporary and never fully complete. The controversy surrounding existential loneliness often centers on whether it is a universal truth to be accepted or a pathological state to be overcome. Some might argue that it is overly pessimistic or that true empathy and connection can bridge the gap between individuals, making the claim of absolute aloneness an exaggeration. Religious perspectives often offer solace by positing a connection to a divine being or a community of believers, which can mitigate feelings of ultimate aloneness.
Others might find the concept overwhelming and depressing, preferring to focus on the joys of social connection and the shared aspects of human experience. They might argue that focusing on our differences overshadows our common humanity. However, for many, confronting existential loneliness is a crucial step towards self-understanding and a more profound engagement with life. It's about accepting a fundamental truth and learning to live with it rather than trying to escape it. It's a recognition that while we are alone in our being, we are also united in that shared condition of aloneness. To fall asleep contemplating existential loneliness is to sink into the quiet core of your own being, to feel the profound solitude of consciousness, even as the world hums around you. Your mind might drift through the unique landscape of your thoughts and feelings, recognizing their unshareable nature and wondering about the inner worlds of those you love. It can be a deeply peaceful contemplation, a radical acceptance of self-sufficiency, or a poignant reminder of the inherent distance between souls. The controversy isn't about whether we feel lonely, but about whether that loneliness is an inherent, inescapable truth of our existence, and how we choose to live with that profound realization. It's a lullaby that whispers of the quiet, solitary journey of the self, and the unique peace found in embracing your own ultimate company. Let's jump into our next idea, misanthropy in philosophy. From the intimate solitude of existential loneliness, we now shift to a more outward-looking, yet equally isolating perspective, misanthropy in philosophy. Misanthropy, in its general sense, is a general dislike, distrust, or contempt for the human species, or human nature.
In philosophy, it's not merely an emotional aversion, but often a reasoned stance, supported by arguments about humanity's inherent flaws, destructive tendencies, and moral failings. Philosophical misanthropy isn't necessarily about hating individual people or wishing harm upon them. Instead, it's a critical assessment of humanity as a species, often concluding that humans are fundamentally flawed, irrational, cruel, hypocritical, or destructive. It's a skepticism about human goodness, progress, and our capacity for genuine virtue. Sources and expressions of misanthropy in philosophy can be found across various traditions. 1. Critique of human nature. Many misanthropic arguments stem from a pessimistic view of human nature. Thinkers like Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan argued that in a state of nature, human life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, driven by self-interest and a desire for power. He believed that only a strong sovereign could prevent humanity from descending into chaos. 2. Observation of human history. The endless cycles of war, genocide, oppression, exploitation, and cruelty throughout history can lead to a misanthropic conclusion. If humans consistently behave in such destructive ways, despite all our supposed intelligence and moral development, then perhaps there is something fundamentally wrong with us. 3. Environmental destruction. As seen in eco-philosophy and VHMT, the devastating impact of humanity on the planet, pollution, resource depletion, climate change, species extinction, is a powerful argument for misanthropy. If humans are inherently destructive to the very systems that sustain life, then perhaps our existence is a net negative. 4. Hypocrisy and irrationality. Misanthropes often point to human hypocrisy, our tendency to preach one thing and practice another, our capacity for self-deception, and our susceptibility to irrational beliefs and prejudices. They see a species that often acts against its own long-term interests and those of the planet, driven by short-sighted desires. 5. Philosophical pessimism. Misanthropy often aligns with philosophical pessimism, which views life as inherently undesirable due to suffering. If human existence is a source of immense suffering for ourselves and others, then a dislike for the species becomes a logical consequence. 6. The problem of evil. For those struggling with the problem of suffering, particularly moral evil caused by humans, misanthropy can be a response to the perceived wickedness or indifference of humanity. Famous literary misanthropes like Jonathan Swift, for example, in the Yahoos, particularly the Yahoos, and philosophical figures like Arthur Schopenhauer, who saw humanity as driven by blind, irrational will, exemplify this perspective. The implications of philosophical misanthropy are often isolating. It can lead to a sense of disillusionment, a withdrawal from social engagement, or a deep skepticism about efforts to improve humanity or society. It can also fuel arguments for radical measures, such as Antinatilsim or VHMT, as the only ethical response to a fundamentally flawed species. The controversy surrounding misanthropy is obvious. It directly contradicts our innate desire for connection, our belief in human goodness, and our hopes for progress. Critics argue that it's overly generalizing. Misanthropy often paints all humans with the same brush, ignoring the vast diversity of human behavior, the capacity for altruism, compassion, love, and self-sacrifice. It's counterproductive. If one believes humanity is inherently bad, it can lead to apathy and a lack of motivation to work for positive change. Why bother trying to improve things if the species is irredeemable? It's a form of self-hatred. Since misanthropes are themselves human, their stance can be seen as a form of self-loathing or a projection of their own negative feelings. It ignores progress. Critics point to advancements in human rights, science, and technology as evidence of our capacity for improvement and our potential to overcome our flaws.
However, proponents of philosophical misanthropy argue that it is a necessary corrective to naive optimism and anthropocentric hubris. By unflinchingly examining humanity's darker side, it can foster a more realistic understanding of our challenges and prevent us from falling into complacency. It can also motivate a deep commitment to environmental protection and animal welfare, seeing humans as the primary threat. For some, a misanthropic perspective can lead to a strange kind of peace,
a release from the burden of expecting humanity to be better than it is, and a quiet acceptance of its inherent limitations. To fall asleep contemplating misanthropy in philosophy is to observe humanity from a critical distance, to weigh its destructive tendencies against its fleeting virtues, and to perhaps find a quiet resignation in the face of its perceived flaws. Your mind might drift through historical atrocities, environmental devastations, and the endless folly of human nature, wondering if true peace lies in detaching from the species you belong to. It can be a deeply unsettling contemplation, challenging your sense of belonging and your belief in collective good, but also one that offers a stark, unvarnished view of reality. The controversy isn't about whether humans have flaws, but whether those flaws are so fundamental and pervasive as to warrant contempt for the entire species. It's a lullaby that whispers of humanity's long shadow, and the strange, quiet comfort found in accepting that some things, perhaps, are simply beyond redemption. Let's jump into our next idea, transhumanism. From the critical, often pessimistic view of humanity offered by Misanthropy, we now pivot to a philosophy that holds an overwhelmingly optimistic, even audacious vision for the future of our species, transhumanism. Transhumanism is an intellectual and cultural movement that advocates for the enhancement of the human condition through advanced science and technology, aiming to overcome what it sees as fundamental human limitations, such as aging, disease, cognitive constraints, and even mortality. The core belief of transhumanism is that humanity, in its current biological form, is merely a starting point. We have the potential and perhaps the ethical imperative to evolve beyond our natural limitations, using tools like genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, biotechnology, and neuroscience. Key goals and concepts within transhumanism include 1. Radical life extension and immortality. Perhaps the most prominent goal is to significantly extend human lifespan, eventually overcoming aging and achieving biological immortality. This could involve regenerative medicine, cryonics, or uploading consciousness to digital platforms. 2. Cognitive enhancement. Improving human intelligence, memory, focus, and learning capabilities beyond natural limits, possibly through nootropics, brain-computer interfaces, or genetic modifications. 3. Physical augmentation. Enhancing physical strength, speed, sensory perception, and resilience, potentially through prosthetics, exoskeletons, or genetic engineering. 4. Emotional and psychological enhancement. Modulating emotions to reduce suffering, enhance positive feelings, or broaden the range of human experience, possibly through pharmaceutical means or direct brain stimulation. 5. Overcoming biological constraints, liberating humanity from the limitations of the physical body, potentially through mind uploading, inhabiting artificial bodies, avatars, or adapting to extreme environments. 6. The singularity, the hypothetical future point at which technological growth becomes uncontrollable and irreversible, resulting in unforeseeable changes to human civilization. This could be driven by superintelligent AI or radical human enhancements. Transhumanists often view the human body and mind as a work in progress, a biological machine that can be engineered, upgraded, and optimized. They see suffering, disease, aging, and death not as inevitable parts of the human condition, but as problems to be solved through scientific and technological innovation. They often embrace a rational, scientific, and progress-oriented worldview, rejecting traditional religious or philosophical views that might see human limitations as natural or divinely ordained. The implications of transhumanism are vast and revolutionary. It promises a future where humans are stronger, smarter, healthier, and live indefinitely. It could fundamentally alter what it means to be human, blurring the lines between biology and technology, nature and artifice. It could lead to entirely new forms of consciousness and new modes of existence. But however, Transhumanism is one of the most controversial philosophies precisely because of these radical implications. Critics raise numerous ethical, social, and existential concerns. Ethical concerns. Playing God. Many religious and secular critics argue that transhumanism involves hubris, overstepping natural boundaries, or playing God. Designer babies and eugenics. The prospect of genetic engineering raises fears of designer babies and a new form of eugenics, where only the wealthy can afford enhancements, leading to increased social stratification and discrimination. Loss of humanity. What happens to our empathy, our appreciation for life's fragility, or our understanding of what it means to be human, if we eliminate suffering, mortality, and our natural limitations? Will enhanced humans still be human in a meaningful sense? Social and economic concerns. Inequality. Access to enhancement technologies would likely be expensive, creating a divide between the enhanced and the unenhanced, potentially leading to a new class system or even different species. Overpopulation and resource depletion. If people live indefinitely, how would this impact global resources and population dynamics? Unforeseen consequences. Rapid technological change could lead to unpredictable and potentially catastrophic outcomes. Existential concerns. Meaning and purpose. If we overcome all limitations, what will be the purpose of life? Will a life without struggle, challenge, or the finite nature of time still be meaningful? Identity. If we constantly upgrade our bodies and minds, what happens to our sense of personal identity? Boredom. Could eternal life, even with enhanced capabilities, eventually lead to profound boredom or existential ennui? Despite these serious criticisms, transhumanists believe that the potential benefits, the eradication of disease, the end of suffering, the expansion of human potential, outweigh the risks. They see it as the next logical step in human evolution, driven by our inherent desire to improve our condition.
To fall asleep contemplating transhumanism is to dream of a future where the limits of flesh and mind are dissolved, where disease is a memory and death is an option, not a certainty. Your mind might drift through visions of augmented bodies, expanded consciousness, and an endless future of exploration and self-improvement. It can be an exhilarating and hopeful contemplation, imagining humanity freed from its ancient burdens. The controversy isn't just about the technology itself, but about what it means to be human, what we value in our natural state, and whether the pursuit of ultimate enhancement is a noble aspiration or a dangerous hubris. It's a lullaby that whispers of evolution's next chapter and the strange, unsettling peace found in the promise of transcending all natural limitations, even the very act of sleep itself. Let's jump into our next idea, the paradox of freedom.
To fall asleep contemplating the paradox of freedom is to wrestle with the delicate balance between choice and constraint, liberation and responsibility. Your mind might drift through scenarios of absolute license versus ordered liberty, wondering where true autonomy lies. It's a contemplation that can be both exhilarating in its embrace of choice and unsettling in its recognition that unchecked freedom can be self-destructive. The controversy isn't about whether freedom is good, but about its very definition and the conditions required for its meaningful existence. It's a lullaby that whispers of the subtle chains that enable true flight, and the quiet, ordered peace found in accepting that some limits are necessary for boundless possibility. Let's jump into our next idea, the red button thought experiment. From the intricate philosophical balancing act of freedom, we now move to a stark and ethically confrontational thought experiment, the red button. This scenario, often invoked in discussions of negative utilitarianism, Efilism, and the problem of suffering, forces us to confront the ultimate moral choice. If you could eliminate all suffering, at what cost would you do it? The thought experiment typically goes like this. Imagine there is a button, a single red button, that, if pressed, would instantaneously and painlessly end all sentient life in the universe. Not just human life, but all life capable of experiencing pain or pleasure. The universe would become utterly devoid of consciousness, a silent, empty expanse. The critical condition is that this act would be entirely painless, without any suffering being caused in the process of extinction. The question then arises, is it morally permissible or even morally obligatory to press the red button? This thought experiment is designed to test our deepest moral intuitions, especially regarding the value of life versus the evil of suffering. Arguments for pressing the button often come from a strong negative utilitarian perspective. Elimination of all suffering. If suffering is the ultimate evil, and life inevitably entails suffering, as argued by antinatalists and philosophical pessimists, then pressing the button would achieve the greatest moral good by eliminating all future suffering, forever. No deprivation. Since the extinction would be painless and instantaneous, no existing sentient being would experience the suffering of death or the loss of life. And since no future beings would ever exist, they would not be deprived of any potential happiness or experience. The asymmetry argument. The absence of suffering is good, even if not experienced, while the absence of happiness is not bad for those who never exist. Therefore, a universe without sentient life is morally superior to any universe that contains suffering, no matter how much happiness it also contains. Arguments against pressing the button are numerous and often rooted in our strong pro-life intuitions and the value we place on existence. Value of life, happiness. Critics argue that life itself has intrinsic value, and that happiness, love, creativity, and consciousness are profound goods that far outweigh the existence of suffering. To eliminate all life would be to destroy these immense goods. Potential for future good. Even if life currently contains suffering, there is always the potential for future progress, more happiness, and the alleviation of suffering through technological or social means. Pressing the button would prematurely end all such possibilities. The good of non-existence. Many find it difficult to grasp the idea of a good that is not experienced by anyone. The good of the absence of suffering in an empty universe seems like a hollow victory compared to the vibrant, albeit imperfect, reality of conscious existence. Moral repugnance. The act of ending all life, even painlessly, is repugnant to most people's moral intuitions. It feels like an ultimate act of destruction, even framed as a benevolent act of suffering prevention. The controversy isn't, but in the radical reevaluation of value it demands. It's a lullaby that whispers of the final silence and the profound, terrifying peace found in the absence of all sound, all feeling, all being. Let's jump into our next idea, the red button thought experiment.
Simulation theory. From the ultimate ethical dilemma of the red button, we now leap into a realm of pure metaphysics and epistemology, exploring a concept that could fundamentally alter our understanding of reality itself, simulation theory. This hypothesis posits that our entire universe, including Earth, our consciousness, and everything we perceive, might in fact be an artificial simulation, akin to a sophisticated computer program. The most famous modern articulation of this theory comes from philosopher Nick Bostrom. In his 2003 paper, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?, Bostrom argues that at least one of three propositions must be true. 1. The human-level civilization is very unlikely to reach a post-human, technologically advanced enough to run detailed ancestor simulations. We will likely go extinct or destroy ourselves before reaching that capability. 2. Any post-human civilization is extremely unlikely to run a significant number of simulations of its evolutionary history, ancestor simulations. They might not be interested or find it unethical, or it might be too resource-intensive. 3. We are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. If post-human civilizations do exist and do run such simulations, and they could run billions of them, then the probability that we are one of the original base reality civilizations is astronomically small compared to the probability that we are one of the simulated ones. Think of it this way. If a highly advanced civilization can create incredibly realistic simulations of entire universes with conscious beings, and they run many of these, then statistically, it's far more likely that we are one of the billions of simulated consciousnesses rather than the single original base reality consciousness. The concept isn't entirely new. Ancient philosophical and religious traditions have explored similar ideas, like Plato's allegory of the cave or the Hindu concept of Maya, illusion. However, modern simulation theory grounds itself in our rapidly advancing technological capabilities, particularly in virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and computing power. What if our descendants, billions of years from now, have the power to simulate entire universes? Implications of simulation theory are vast and mind-bending. 1. Nature of reality. If we are simulated, then what is real? Is the base reality the only true reality, or is our simulated reality just as real for us? This challenges our fundamental understanding of existence. 2. Meaning and purpose. If we are characters in a simulation, what is our purpose? Are we part of an experiment, a game, or a historical reenactment? Does our suffering or joy have any meaning to the simulators? This can connect to existential nihilism, but with a technological twist. 3. The simulators. Who are they? Are they benevolent, indifferent, or malevolent? Do they intervene? Could they be gods in our simulated world? The idea opens up new possibilities for understanding divine intervention or cosmic design. 4. Ethics. Do the simulators have ethical obligations to us? Do we have ethical obligations to them? What if we discovered glitches or ways to communicate with them? 5. Scientific laws. Are the laws of physics in our universe fundamental or merely programming rules within the simulation? Could they be changed or manipulated? 6. Death and afterlife. If consciousness can be simulated, could it be copied, paused, or restarted? This opens up new ways to think about immortality or an afterlife within a technological framework. The controversy around simulation theory is intense. Critics argue, 1. Untestable hypothesis. The primary criticism is that it's largely unfalsifiable. How could we definitively prove or disprove that we are in a simulation? Any evidence we might find could itself be part of the simulation. 2. Infinite regress. If we are in a simulation, what about the reality of the simulators? Are they in a simulation?
This could lead to an infinite regress of simulations, which doesn't ultimately explain anything. 3. Occam's razor. The principle of Occam's razor suggests that the simplest explanation is usually the best. Is it simpler to assume we are in a base reality, or to posit an entire layer of advanced simulators? 4. The problem of consciousness. How does consciousness emerge in a simulation? Is it merely an illusion, or could simulated beings truly be conscious? This delves into the hard problem of consciousness. 5. Emotional discomfort. For many, the idea of being a simulated entity is deeply unsettling, diminishing their sense of agency, uniqueness, or the inherent value of their experiences. Despite these criticisms, simulation theory remains a fascinating and compelling thought experiment, especially for those in the tech world and philosophy of mind. It encourages us to think critically about the nature of reality and consciousness, and to consider the profound implications of our own technological trajectory. To fall asleep contemplating simulation theory is to experience a profound shift in your understanding of everything around you. Your mind might drift through the possibility that the very bed you lie on, the sounds you hear, the thoughts you think, are all lines of code, meticulously rendered data. You might wonder if your dreams are subroutines, or if the glitches in your memory are just minor bugs. It can be a deeply disorienting but also strangely liberating thought, as it frees you from many conventional assumptions about reality. The controversy isn't about whether it's true, but about how radically it challenges our most fundamental perceptions, and whether we could ever truly know. It's a lullaby that whispers of hidden code, of layers of reality, and the profound, unsettling peace found in realizing that your entire world, your entire self, might just be a beautifully constructed dream.